Year 9, welcome to this week's Loom lesson. We're going to be looking at the causes of deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. Take this opportunity now to make sure you've got a pen, pencil and paper to hand, and also it would be really good to have the 2-week work that you did on this topic, to have that to hand as well. I've got the slides up from that 2-week work here in front of me. I'm going to work from these slides today because they are absolutely the right thing to use. So go and find that work, and I'll see you in a minute. I'll just pause for a second in case you need a moment just to get those things and have them ready. Okay. Right, so it's a good week to be doing this because on Monday I posted some work on class charts covering management of tropical rainforests and also how we can, as a world, achieve this sustainably. And that links really well with what we're looking at today, which are the causes of deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. So if you get the opportunity to do this at similar times, that would be really handy. If you don't, then just keep this in mind at the point that you're doing that work as well. Okay, so have the work that you've done from these slides to hand. Check it as you go along. Pause this video if you need to. Add to it as required. That will be really, really fantastic. Let's start by actually talking through some of the stuff from the videos that you would have gone through on this 2-week work. As they highlighted, there's 30% of the world is rainforest. And if we carry on at the rate of deforestation that we've got at the moment, then that could completely disappear in about 100 years. Forestry and agriculture amounts to about 24% of greenhouse gas emissions. And when we fell trees, that releases carbon. And with the trees gone, they can no longer continue to absorb the greenhouse gases. So we end up with more of it in the atmosphere and increased global warming. So a lot of challenges that we face. You had the resources to go through, and with this work, the 6 different causes of deforestation worksheet. What we're going to do is go through those 6 different causes. If you remember, we also split one of them into two different headings. So that was commercial farming for cattle and commercial farming for crops. But let's go through those one by one, and let's start with logging. Yeah, one of the smaller causes for deforestation, with only 3% of the total deforestation coming from timber products. As you can see, most timber companies are most interested in trees such as mahogany and teak. Mahogany and teak are very, very valuable types of wood made to make expensive furniture. Don't find mahogany and teak in IKEA. Don't find it where I shop. But if you look in a lot of very expensive furniture shops, you will see things made out of mahogany and teak. You can make a lot of money from those, and they grow in the Amazon rainforest. There are answers, though, to wholesale logging, so clearing whole areas. One of the things that we look at in this week's 2-week pack of work is selective logging. So instead of clearing all the trees in an area, the process that we've referred to as felling, the loggers go in and they only cut down the highest value trees, so the tallest ones. They leave most of the forest intact. That can have advantages as well, because what you do is actually clear space, so the younger trees have more space and light to grow, and you can enable the forest to regenerate naturally. When you think about it, makes perfect sense, because we're going to want to keep going back for generation after generation to be able to find these trees to be able to continue to make furniture. But it hasn't been happening that way. There are other things as well. I mean, international agreements, something else we covered this week. in the latest work on class charts. So you will notice on this week's work that you will come across you see trees that are branded with the initials FSC, so the Forest Stewardship Council. That's a real tongue twister. But it's an international non-governmental organisation which promotes responsible management of the world's forests. So what happens is that timber producing countries agree to ensure that their timber is coming from these legal and sustainable sources. So, in other words, selective logging. It's a really good idea. It's not always as simple to do in practice as it sounds in theory, because although countries sign international agreements, they often find them hard to put into place. You may have noticed from the videos that there are issues with people doing things illegally. Bear in mind, the Amazon is a huge, huge area, so it's very, very difficult to police. Okay, so from logging, let's move to mineral extraction. So some of the minerals that can be found beneath these rainforests can be incredibly valuable. Obviously, mining is common, not just for gold, but also for iron ore, and also drilling for oil. So whilst it's only 1 to 2% of deforestation, it's a very valuable 1 to 2%. However, mineral extraction also brings with it issues like pollution. So it's not just damage to the land that you are mining, but the pollution that you can create from that mining can then damage the surrounding land and the environment and the species that inhabit it. So there are issues there. But we'll come back to mining a little bit later on, because the value that it brings, the financial value for the countries concerned, can make mining a pretty compelling thing to go and do. Okay, energy development. Well, of course, the more people that settle in these regions and the greater amount of industry there, then the greater the need for energy. Obviously, you've got an unlimited supply of water as well. You've got some great water availability in the Amazon, fresh water. However, flooding vast areas of rainforest is very much a short-term thing. The submerged forest, as it says in the notes here, gradually rots, makes the water very acidic. That acidity then corrodes the turbines in the dam. So the dam then also becomes blocked with soil that's washed down from deforested slopes by heavy rain. We already know a lot about the soil and how easily that runs off. So again, whilst it doesn't make up a vast amount of the deforestation within the Amazon, the effects can be quite considerable. Okay, so let's move on to the first of those farming options, so cattle farming. Yeah, we've had large areas of the Amazon cleared to make way for livestock rearing. You're looking at 65 to 75% of the rainforest destruction in Brazil. So this is pretty serious stuff. But here's the thing. The land isn't used for long because the quality of the cattle's feeding land, the pasture, declines very, very quickly. And so they have to move on to new areas, which means cutting down even more trees. If we go on to look at the crop farming as well, very similar situation. You can make way for these vast plantations, for bananas, palm oil, pineapple, sugar, and so on. But after a while, the soil is no longer able to be used. So the farmers have to cut down more forest to grow more crops. It is very short-term thinking. And of course, the more that you have this short-term thinking, so the more the rainforest you clear for farming, and we're talking about 12 to 15 million hectares in total each year, which has been calculated to be the equivalent, as you may have noticed in the videos, 36 football pitches a minute. then you are talking about a major, major deforestation situation. And worse still, so much of this is cleared by slash and burn because it's quick. It's a great, quick way to clear the space. But that in itself releases a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and it doesn't even make use of the natural resources that are all destroyed to create the farming land quickly, whilst the loss of forest continues to be to contribute to 12 to 17% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it is not only incredibly harmful for the environment across the globe, but it's invariably just leads to short-term gain for the nation, principally Brazil, in terms of the agricultural gain that they get. Of course, the more that you encroach into the rainforest, the more that you're looking to need to build roads, which then cuts greater trails through the rainforest, which allows more people into the forest, which then leads us on to our last of the 6 options, which is settlement and population growth. So all of the reasons for deforestation, as it says, have a knock-on effect, and that's that you need more people to make them happen. Then that leads to a higher population, more settlements. But as you can probably gather, as people are moving in, for example, to work in agriculture, those settlements are moving on as well. Very, very contrasting to the situation that preceded this. So before we started deforesting, and bearing in mind there's more than 350,000 indigenous groups occupying the rainforests, amounts to around 2 billion people who have lived, and worked in the rainforest for generations, depending upon it for food, shelter, and their very existence. They carefully worked there and didn't damage it for fear that they would damage their future. A great example to all of us of sustainability. In producing these commercial things, the logging, the mineral extraction, the energy development, the commercial farming of cattle and crops, you need to build roads because of the sheer scale of it, and then you end up producing this huge settlement and population growth. So generally, these causes of deforestation, these 6 causes of deforestation, share 2 things in common. First, as I hope you've noticed, their short-term nature, and second, their lack of sustainability. So, for example, with the cattle and the crops, as we've said, the soil quickly becomes infertile and the farmers need to move on. So that means more roads, more settlements, more need for energy, and even less rainforest. Mineral extraction, though, on the other hand, provides both a significant economic gain to a nation's economy and certain resources the world needs. So, should this be a point of compromise? Or are there ways in which minerals can be kept in the ground of areas of such significance? I mean, let's bear in mind that 20% of the world's oxygen comes from the Amazon alone. This brings us quite neatly onto the question that was in this 2-week pack of work on the Yasuni National Park. So let's bring that question up here. So underneath a part of the Yasuni National Park lie an estimated 846 million barrels of oil worth $7 billion. So in 2007, the government of Ecuador, and Ecuador is the small country there next to Colombia, also in the Amazon basin there, in which the Yasuni National Park lies. The government of Ecuador introduced a scheme saying that it will not allow oil drilling in this part of the Yasuni National Park. Keeping the oil in the ground will stop 400 million tons of carbon dioxide from going into the atmosphere. But bear in mind, Ecuador is not a wealthy country. It is quite a low-income country. To keep that oil in the ground what the Ecuadorian government have done is negotiated a deal that the rest of the world pays them 3.6 billion as compensation. Now, bearing in mind, you could say, well, 3.6 billion compared to 7 billion, that's not such a good deal. But it would be a Western oil company, I would suspect, that would have gone into that area of Ecuador. It would have been worth 7 billion to them, but I dare say that the Ecuadorian government wouldn't have done any better than 3.6 billion in what they would have earned in revenue for that company, for example, like BP or Shell going in there and taking the oil out. So the Ecuadorians have done pretty well out of this. They've kept their that particular national park intact, and they've also been paid to keep the oil underground. However, by the end of 2013, not all the compensation money had been paid to Ecuador, and the future of the scheme was uncertain. So you had the map here showing where Ecuador is in South America, showing where the national park is in Ecuador, and you had some viewpoints from different people. So some saying, well, okay, many roads, health centres and schools in the rainforest areas of Ecuador were built by the oil companies, so a positive there on a perspective from someone. Somebody highlighting that the government is still waiting to be paid its money. Others saying that in Ecuador, they need the oil industry for jobs because the oil industry will employ local people. But on the other hand, you've got local people there who've lived in the area for thousands of years, for whom it would have destroyed their homes and their ways of life. Their species would have been destroyed potentially, whereas now it is protected. It's a nature reserve. It means you can get tourists there. And somebody else, I think, quite wisely pointing out that, hey, even if you take this oil up in 30 years, it's gone. Whereas, of course, if you sustainably manage the tropical rainforest, it's there for generations. Anyway, your task was, and let's go back to the slides to answer this question. Drilling for oil in the Yasuni National Park has more advantages than disadvantages. To what extent do you agree with this statement? Okay. Now, I'm going to give you some ideas as to what a detailed answer would look like for that. So what sort of points, hopefully, you will have started to extract either for the advantages, but also for the disadvantages, to enable you to then be able to give reasons for your decisions. So listen through the points that I'm going to make, and then you can check those against your work. Don't forget, you can always rewind this if you want to cover this over again. Stop it and start it. I would suggest using a different colour pen to make any alterations that you might wish to do. Okay, so for a detailed answer there, we would be looking for detailed reasons with a continued development of ideas. So for a positive answer there, so saying that it has more advantages than disadvantages, we'd be looking for detailed ideas about the advantages of exploiting the oil. So, for example, Ecuador is a poor country, so it's got a low income. The fact that they need to cut down the forests to exploit the oil, as they are reliant on selling these primary products in order to be able to survive. It's a less developed country. It's got other pressing problems to deal with apart from conservation. Should they be having to cut off a source of income when they're trying to improve their economy and invest in infrastructure and improve the lives of their citizens? You could argue that developed countries, they might say to them, you chop down your forests, why shouldn't we do the same? So those would be points that you could make if you were going to try and highlight advantages. From the point of view of disadvantages, instead of developing the oil, what about the advantages of not exploiting the oil? So developing the rainforest for ecotourism. Wouldn't that be more effective than drilling for oil, as ecotourism is a responsible development and management of tourism, which helps to preserve the environment, as well as produce jobs for local people and develop crafts, promote people having jobs, for example, as guides. All of these sort of things can provide an ongoing form of employment, not something that will just last until the oil runs out. By getting those carbon credits, so that's the terminology for the $3.6 billion they are due to receive. It's more effective, as it means the forest continues to have more value if they're left to grow, which will then bring in income for the country and persuade the government to actively protect the rainforest as a valuable asset. So considering development of schemes, in other words, that might be more effective than oil exploration, that would be a really effective thing to put for disadvantages. You will actually look at this in more detail in this week's 2-week pack of work. So you'll start to see how Costa Rica have actually used sustainable methods in order to be able to halt the advance of deforestation and see how they've made it work for them. And it's also really useful looking at just this question and the stuff that you're doing this week's 2-week pack of work to be able to see the responsibility that developed nations have as well, because we're all in this together. The future of the world is for the benefit of everybody. And there is actually a really good point when a country like Ecuador actually turns around and says, well, hang on a minute, guys, you're rich, you've used your resources, we're struggling. Why shouldn't we use ours? How about you compensate us in some way? And so we can all actually improve. I think that's even fairer point when you think that it could be Ecuadorians that are leaving the country because they're impoverished, that might be working their way up through Central America to Mexico to then think about actually crossing the border into the United States. So that's thinking back to the work that you've done on borders in Year 8 and establishing some links there. So let's summarize this then. The latest 2-week work that I've just put on class charts covers sustainable management methods in some really good detail. As I say, it uses the Central American nation of Costa Rica as a case study. It demonstrates that deforestation is not irreversible and that sustainability can work, providing a balance between economic necessity and the future of our planet. Yet, as you'll notice through some of the video clips in there, the recently elected president of Brazil, so that's President Bolsonaro, has described the Amazon rainforest as too much land for so few people. And in Brazil, deforestation rates in the country are actually increasing. There's a video in there from 2020 highlighting that this is happening right now. So I hope this has been really useful today, and it's put some more of the details that you will need for this part of the GCSE course into context and really started to highlight the importance of the rainforests. Do make sure that you complete the 2-week work on class charts. These issues are not just big ones for your exam papers for Year 11, they are big ones for our futures as well. If you complete the work as I've set it, let me tell you, you're not just preparing to succeed in your geography GCSE, but you're preparing to understand the issues that face the world. So you, the next generation, can challenge our elected leaders to take the right decisions for the good of humanity, not just for our short-term gain. Okay, I'm going to get off my preaching box now. Have a good week. I will speak to you next week. Take care, Year 9. Bye for now.